For 20 years, he never let a woman near him, until his new assistant broke his walls. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and it is the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The fluorescent lights of Hale Industries' executive floor glowed with a cold, steady hum as Elena Rivera stepped out of the elevator. It was her first morning as the temporary assistant to Marcus Hale, the reclusive billionaire CEO who had not allowed a woman within arm's reach for 20 years. People whispered about him in the hallways, always in the same uneasy tone. Some said he had a phobia. Others insisted he was simply cruel. But the truth was far more complicated, and Elena was about to walk straight into it. She clutched a manila folder against her chest, her palms sweating despite the freezing air conditioning. The corridor leading to his private office felt strangely quiet, as if the entire floor held its breath whenever he was around. The glass walls reflected her anxious steps as she approached the heavy oak door engraved with his name. Marcus Hale, 44 years old, billionaire, brilliant, untouchable. Behind that door, a man lived in a world built on distance. "Miss Rivera?" a voice called softly. Elena turned to see Claire from Human Resources, holding a tablet and wearing a sympathetic expression. "He is particular," Claire whispered. "Keep a 1-yard distance. Do not make sudden movements. And never touch him, not even accidentally." Elena nodded, her stomach tightening. She had read the notes, signed the confidentiality agreements, and repeated the guidelines a dozen times. Still, the idea of someone living under such rigid rules made her chest ache. But she needed this job. Her mother's medical bills were weeks overdue, and if she failed here like the 12 assistants before her, she would have nowhere left to go. Claire pressed a button. The door unlocked with a soft click. Elena stepped inside. The office was vast, modern, and perfectly silent. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city skyline shimmering under the early morning light. A minimalist desk sat near the center, papers stacked with surgical precision, and behind that desk stood Marcus Hale, tall, impeccably dressed, sharp jawline, gloves made of black leather covering both hands. He did not look up at her at first. He just continued scribbling notes, almost mechanically, almost like breathing was secondary to whatever had consumed his mind. When he finally lifted his gaze, his eyes were calm but distant, the kind of distance that had been practiced for decades. "You are Elena Rivera," he said, his voice low, even, controlled. "Yes, sir," she answered, keeping her distance exactly as instructed. He studied her, not with curiosity, but with caution, as if every new person posed a threat he needed to measure. "You will handle my scheduling, communications, and document preparation," he said. "No physical proximity, no exceptions." Elena swallowed. Understood. He turned away, reaching for a stack of reports. A thin ray of morning light caught the edge of his glove, illuminating a faint crack in the leather. Something about it felt symbolic, like even the walls he built had begun to wear down with time. "Deliver these to the legal department," he said, extending the papers toward her without looking. Elena stepped forward just slightly, only half a yard, still within the rules, and reached for the documents. Then it happened. A sudden gust of wind from the air vent lifted the top page. Elena instinctively reached up to catch it. Marcus did the same. Their fingers brushed, a touch lasting less than a second. Marcus froze, his breath hitched. The papers slipped from his hand and scattered across the polished floor. He took one step back, then another, as if his body moved before his mind could process what had happened. Elena's heart pounded. "I am so sorry, sir. I did not mean—" But Marcus was not angry. Not this time. He just stared at his hand, the hand that had accidentally touched hers, with an expression Elena could not read. Confusion. Fear. Something else beneath it. something long buried. For the first time in 20 years he had touched a woman, and the world did not collapse. He lowered his gaze, struggling to steady his breath. "Miss Rivera," he said softly, almost to himself. "Why did that not hurt?" Elena did not know what he meant, not yet, but she would, soon, because that one accidental touch was the beginning of everything he had spent 2 decades avoiding, and the beginning of everything he was about to feel again. The papers lay scattered across the polished floor, but Elena did not move to pick them up right away. She sensed that something fragile had shifted in the air. Marcus stood completely still, his gloved hand hovering slightly, as if he was unsure whether it belonged to him at all. Elena kept her voice soft. "Sir, I truly apologize. It was an accident." Marcus did not answer. His eyes stayed locked on his hand, studying it with the same focus a man might use when examining an old scar he thought would never heal. His breath came uneven, not the sharp panic she expected, but something gentler, confused, almost startled by his own reaction. After several long seconds, he finally spoke. "It did not hurt. It should have hurt." His voice was low, more to himself than to her. Elena knelt carefully to gather the documents, maintaining the distance he asked for. The silence inside the vast office felt heavy, almost echoing. When she handed the papers back, she made sure her fingers stayed far from his. Marcus cleared his throat, as if forcing himself to return to the present. "Miss Rivera, you may continue your tasks. I will handle the rest." But he did not move. He just stood behind his desk, hands pressed against the wood, shoulders tight. Elena noticed the slight tremble in the glove covering the hand that had brushed against hers. Something was happening behind his guarded expression, something he had not allowed himself to feel in decades. Elena turned toward the door but paused when she heard the faintest rustle behind her. Marcus had sunk into his chair, eyes shut, jaw clenched as if fighting memories he did not want to face. The sunlight through the windows softened the sharp lines of his face, revealing the exhaustion he usually hid behind control. She spoke without turning around. "Sir, if you need anything, you can call me." For a moment she thought he would stay silent, but then she heard a quiet reply. "Miss Rivera, why was it different with you?" Elena's breath caught, but she did not let it show. "I do not know, sir, but you are safe. Nothing happened." He opened his eyes. There was a vulnerability in them she had not expected from a man who ruled an empire. "It has been 20 years, he said. 20 years since I allowed anyone close enough to touch me. I thought I would feel the same pain." His fingers curled slowly, as if testing the memory of the accidental contact. "But I did not." Elena finally turned to meet his gaze. "Then maybe that is a good sign." Marcus exhaled, a shaky breath he could not hide. "Or it is the beginning of a problem I am not prepared for." He lifted his hand again, looking at it like it belonged to someone else. This should not have happened. Elena did not argue. She simply nodded, steady and calm. "We can take it one step at a time. I will make sure it does not happen again." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I'm not sure I want to avoid it," he whispered. Elena froze, stunned by the honesty in his voice. It lasted only a second before he straightened his posture, rebuilding the cold exterior he relied on for survival. "You may go," he said firmly. Elena stepped out into the hallway with her heart beating faster than before. She had come to this job to save her mother's life. She never imagined she would be the first person in 20 years to break through the walls of a man who had sworn never to feel again. And somewhere behind that office door, Marcus Hale stared at his own hand and wondered how a single accidental touch had shaken the fortress he had spent 2 decades building. Elena returned to her desk outside the executive office, but her mind stayed with the man behind the closed door. She tried to focus on typing out the morning memos, yet her fingers hovered above the keyboard. Inside that office, Marcus Hale was facing something he had buried so deeply that even he no longer recognized the shape of it. And Elena had been the one to trigger it. Through the frosted glass, she saw his silhouette move only once in nearly 10 minutes. He sat rigidly at his desk, one hand pressed to his forehead, as if fighting off a memory that refused to fade. The quiet of the executive floor felt heavier than usual, almost like the building itself sensed the tension. At 9:15, the intercom on her desk crackled. "Miss Rivera?" Marcus said, his tone steady but softer than before. "Bring in the quarterly reports." "Yes, sir," she answered. She collected the binders and entered his office. Marcus looked composed, but she could see the tiny cracks beneath the surface. His gloves were off. They lay neatly on the edge of the desk, something she had not seen once since she arrived. His bare hands rested on a stack of documents, fingers interlocked tightly, knuckles pale. He did not acknowledge the gloves, and neither did she. "Set them there," he said, motioning to the corner of the desk, still keeping a careful distance. Elena placed the binders down and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Miss Rivera," he said quietly, "do you believe trauma can change suddenly?" Elena hesitated. "I think trauma can shift when the right person or moment presses against it, sir. Sometimes without warning." Marcus absorbed her words, eyes drifting to the sunlight reflecting off the windows. "For 20 years I have avoided any form of contact. It was safer that way, predictable, controlled." He paused, then added, "But when you touched my hand, it was not like before." Elena kept her voice gentle. "What did you feel?" He swallowed, a slow and deliberate movement. Warmth, not panic, not pain, just warmth. The admission seemed to weigh on him, as if it both startled and unsettled him at the same time. Elena spoke softly. "Maybe your mind remembered something good instead of something frightening." Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly, as though she had walked too close to a truth he did not want uncovered. "Do not assume I am improving," he said, but his voice lacked any real edge. "If anything, this inconsistency could become a liability." She nodded, accepting his need to retreat behind logic. "Then we can monitor it. I will be careful." He let out a slow breath, not quite relief but something close. "You have lasted longer than any assistant in the past 2 years," he said. "Most people do not understand my limits." "I do not see limits," Elena replied. "I see someone trying very hard to survive something painful. That is not weakness." For a moment, Marcus stared at her as if trying to decipher why her presence felt different, why her voice did not trigger the old panic, why her nearness did not suffocate him. He shifted his gaze away, unsettled by the unfamiliar calm in his chest. "You may return to your desk," he said finally. But as Elena turned to leave, Marcus spoke again, this time with a quiet sincerity she had not heard from him until now. "Miss Rivera, thank you for not being afraid of me." Elena paused, her hand on the door. "I am not afraid, sir," she said, "and you do not need to be afraid of me either." When she stepped out, she felt his eyes linger on her for a long moment before the door closed softly behind her. Inside, Marcus Hale leaned back in his chair, staring at his bare hands again. For the first time in 20 years, the memory of a touch did not haunt him. It steadied him. And that terrified him more than the fear itself ever had. The rest of the morning passed in a quiet rhythm, but nothing felt the same. Elena noticed the shift every time Marcus called her into his office. His voice stayed calm, controlled, but there was a new awareness in the air, something fragile and unspoken. And each time she stepped inside, his gaze lingered a little longer, as if he was trying to understand what was happening to him. Just after 11, an urgent email came from the operations department. Several contracts needed immediate review. Elena gathered the draft documents and knocked gently on his door. "Come in," Marcus said. He sat at his desk reading financial statements, his concentration precise but his posture heavier than before. The gloves were back on his hands, but they were not fully secured. The right glove was only halfway pulled up, as if he had removed it earlier and put it on in a hurry. It was a small detail, but Elena noticed everything. She placed the stack of documents on the corner of the desk, careful to keep the distance he preferred. "These are the updates from operations, sir. They need your signature today." Marcus nodded and reached for the pen. For a moment he did not sign. His hand hovered over the paper, fingers curling slightly, as if he was fighting a tremor from deep inside. Then, he pressed the pen to the page with deliberate steadiness. Elena waited quietly. Halfway through the second document, he paused. His voice dropped to a low murmur. "Miss Rivera." He did not look up. "When I touched your hand this morning, I did not lose control." Elena kept her expression gentle. "I know, sir. I should have." His voice tightened. "For 20 years, even the smallest contact sent me into a panic. But today," he stopped, releasing a slow breath. "Today was different." Elena stepped a fraction closer, still respecting the rule but allowing her presence to steady him. Different does not mean dangerous. Marcus set the pen down and finally lifted his eyes to hers. "You talk like you have done this before." She shook her head slightly. "No, but I have seen fear, and I know what it looks like when someone begins to step out of it." His expression changed, only a little, but enough for her to see the exhaustion behind his eyes. The kind that came from carrying the same memory for 2 decades without rest. "Miss Rivera," he said, "you do not know what happened 20 years ago." "No," she replied softly, "but I can see what it did to you." Marcus inhaled sharply, the kind of breath a person takes when a wound is touched, even without physical contact. He leaned back in his chair, his shoulders drawing tight. "You should know something," he said. "There was someone, a woman, my fiancée." His voice dipped as if the word itself weighed too much. "She died in an accident. I was the one driving." Elena felt her heart pull in her chest. She did not interrupt. "After that," he continued, "any time a woman came close, it triggered the memory. The smell of her perfume, her scream, the cold. Everything returned at once." He pressed his gloved hand to his forehead. Touch became unbearable. Even a brush of skin felt like drowning. Elena spoke gently. "I am very sorry, sir." Marcus lowered his hand. "I told myself I deserved the pain, that it was the punishment for surviving when she did not." The room fell silent. Then Marcus said something so quietly she almost missed it. "But when you touched me, there was no punishment." Elena stepped back only to give him space. "That does not mean you are forgetting her," she said. "It just means you're still alive." The words struck him harder than she expected. His eyes softened, the smallest break in the wall he had built. He straightened, regaining his usual composure. "I have a meeting at noon. Prepare the presentation slides and bring them to the boardroom." "Yes, sir." Elena gathered the remaining papers. But before she reached the door, Marcus called after her. "Miss Rivera." She turned. His voice lowered again, steady but honest. "Thank you for listening." Outside the office, Elena placed a hand over her own chest. His story sat heavy in her heart. For 20 years, he had carried a wound alone, and today, for the first time, he had let someone see it. Inside the room, Marcus stared at the pen still resting on the contract. His hand no longer shook. He did not know if he was ready to change. But something had already begun, something he could not undo. For the first time in 2 decades, he no longer felt completely alone inside his own silence. The boardroom was already being prepared when Elena arrived with the presentation materials. Assistants from other departments hurried around, arranging charts and testing the projector. Everything felt normal on the surface, but Elena carried the weight of Marcus's confession through every step she took. She could still hear the quiet ache in his voice when he spoke about the past he had never allowed anyone to touch. At 11:45, she checked the time, made sure all documents were aligned, and returned to his office. Marcus stood at the window, staring out at the skyline as if the city itself might offer answers he had avoided for 20 years. His shoulders were stiff, his hands clasped behind his back. The gloves were still on, but they were smoothed down neatly now, without the tension from earlier. "Sir," Elena said softly, "the boardroom is ready." Marcus did not turn at first. He remained still, letting a long moment of quiet settle between them. Finally, he exhaled and faced her. "Miss Rivera," he said, "I need to ask you something before we go." Elena kept her posture open, patient. "Of course, sir." His gaze lingered on her face a second longer than usual, as if searching for certainty he could borrow. "This morning," he said, "when I felt your hand, nothing inside me broke. I have been asking myself why, and I cannot answer it." Elena nodded gently. "Sometimes the body remembers safety, even before the mind understands why." He looked down at his hands. "Safety is not something I have allowed myself in a very long time." She could hear the struggle in his words, the way each sentence carried years of buried fear. "You are allowed to feel safe, sir," she said. Something flickered across his expression, a soft disbelief wrapped in hope he was not ready to claim. He cleared his throat. "We should not be late. Follow me." They walked toward the boardroom, Marcus keeping his usual careful distance. But there was a subtle difference. His steps were more measured, not rushed, not tense. Elena stayed beside him, matching his pace without crowding his space. When they entered the room, several executives greeted Marcus formally. He nodded back with professionalism, but the tension in his jaw returned the moment a female board member approached him to shake his hand. Elena saw it immediately. His breath shortened, his shoulders stiffened, and his right hand curled slightly inside the glove. A trigger, an old reflex trying to take control. Before the situation could escalate, Elena stepped forward smoothly, her voice calm and steady. "Mr. Hale will review the slides first," she said, guiding the attention away from the handshake. "We prepared an updated sequence for easier discussion." The board member politely lowered her hand, redirecting her attention to the screen. Marcus glanced at Elena, the smallest shift in his eyes revealing gratitude he could not express publicly. She had stepped in at the exact moment he needed her to, without exposing his vulnerability to anyone in the room. The meeting began. Marcus led the presentation with precision, his voice strong, controlled, and clear. Elena watched him navigate the discussion with the confidence of a man who had built an empire from discipline alone. But she also noticed the subtle tremors he hid under the table whenever a sudden movement happened near him, or when someone leaned too close. Every time, Elena adjusted the seating layout or redirected a question to give him space. It was subtle enough that no one else noticed, but Marcus did. He saw every small intervention she made to keep him steady. When the meeting ended, the executives began filing out of the room. Marcus stayed seated a moment longer, waiting for the crowd to thin. Elena gathered the presentation papers. Only when the last person left did Marcus speak. "You saw it," he said quietly. Elena paused. "Yes, I did." "And you helped me?" "Yes, sir." He breathed out, the kind of breath that carried both relief and humiliation. "I hate that this still happens to me." "It is not your fault," Elena said. "Trauma does not disappear in a day." He looked up at her slowly. "But I did not fall apart." "No," she said, "you did not." The truth settled between them, warm and steady. "I could not have done this without you," Marcus admitted, his voice low and raw. Elena held his gaze. "You did it because you have strength, sir. I only helped you see it." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Marcus stood, adjusting his suit to regain his composure. "Walk with me back to the office," he said. They stepped into the hallway together. He kept his distance, but something unspoken had changed. The space between them no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a bridge beginning to form. For the first time since the morning, Marcus did not look at his hands. He looked at her. The elevator doors closed behind them with a soft chime, sealing Marcus and Elena inside the quiet metal space. They stood a few feet apart, the familiar distance he always kept. But the atmosphere was different now. The air felt warmer, charged with something unspoken that neither of them dared to name yet. Marcus's eyes stayed fixed on the illuminated floor numbers, but Elena could sense his thoughts drifting far from the present moment. His shoulders were tense again, but not with fear. It was the weight of realization, the kind that settled heavy once the adrenaline faded. When the elevator reached the executive floor, Marcus stepped out first. Elena followed closely, holding the documents from the meeting. The walk back to his office was silent, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that formed between two people who had seen something vulnerable in each other and were still learning how to hold it. Inside the office, Marcus paused behind his desk but did not sit down immediately. He looked out toward the city again, the same skyline he had watched every day for years. But today, his reflection in the glass felt different to him, less rigid, less untouchable. "Miss Rivera," he said without turning around, "I want to ask you something." Elena set the documents aside. "Of course, sir," he finally faced her. "In the meeting, when you stepped in, you knew exactly what was happening to me." "Yes," she said softly. "I recognize the signs." "Because you have seen them before?" he asked. She nodded. "My mother had severe anxiety after my father passed. The smallest things could bring her back to moments she was trying to forget. People did not always see it happening, but I did. I learned how to help her without making her feel exposed." Marcus absorbed this quietly. "So you are saying you have experience caring for someone with trauma?" "In a way, yes," Elena answered. "But I am not comparing your pain to hers. I only mean that I understand how memories can shape someone's reactions." His gaze dropped to the floor. "Reactions I cannot always control." "You controlled them today," Elena said. "You did better than you think." Marcus sat down slowly, as if the truth of her words pushed him into the chair. His hand rested on the desk, fingers gently tapping in a subtle rhythmic motion. It was a nervous habit, but also a grounding one. "You did not react the way others do," he said. "They either pity me or avoid me. You did neither." "I do not see you as someone to pity," Elena said. "I see someone trying to heal." The word heal made his breath catch. He looked up sharply, as if she had stepped onto a part of him he kept hidden even from himself. "Healing is not something I ever believed I deserved," he said quietly. Elena walked closer, stopping just shy of the distance he always maintained. "You deserve peace, sir. Everyone does." Marcus studied her with an intensity that held no fear, only conflict. "If that is true, then why does it feel so difficult to accept?" "Because 20 years is a long time to carry pain alone," she answered. "It does not disappear overnight." He let out a slow, unsteady breath. "I do not want to be ruled by this anymore." "You will not be," she said. "Not if you have someone walking with you through it." He froze, the meaning of her words settling deep. "Someone," he repeated. Elena held his gaze. "Someone you trust." He swallowed hard. "Trust is not something I give easily." "I know," she said quietly. "But you are giving it now, even if you do not notice it." Marcus leaned back slightly, the truth of her statement hitting him harder than he expected. For years, he had let no one near him, and yet here she was, standing in the one place he never allowed a woman to stand. His voice lowered, filled with something unfamiliar. "Miss Rivera, why you?" Elena did not look away. "Maybe because I am not here to fix you. I'm just here to help you feel human again." A long silence filled the room. Not heavy, gentle. Marcus exhaled, this time without shaking. "I would like to continue working with you, if you are willing." Elena smiled softly. "I'm not going anywhere, sir." He nodded once, almost to himself. "Then I suppose that is enough for today." Elena stepped back toward the door, giving him space. But before she left, Marcus spoke again. "Miss Rivera," he said, his voice quieter than before. "I did not feel fear today. Not when you touched me. Not in the meeting. Not now." Elena's heart softened. "That is progress, sir." He looked at her with a vulnerability he could no longer hide. "It feels like the first progress I have made in 20 years. Elena opened the door, but the weight of his words stayed with her long after she stepped outside. Inside, Marcus Hale rested his hand on the desk, bare and unafraid, as if testing the truth he had just spoken. For the first time in 2 decades, he felt himself beginning to breathe again. That evening, the office slowly emptied as employees headed home, leaving the executive floor wrapped in a quiet stillness. Most lights were dimmed, but a soft glow still seeped from the edge of Marcus's door. Elena finished sorting the final emails and prepared to clock out when her phone buzzed with a message from security. "Miss Rivera, Mr. Hale requested that you remain on the floor until he confirms something with you." She blinked in surprise. Marcus rarely made personal requests, and never after hours. She gathered her things and approached his office, knocking gently. "Come in," Marcus said. He stood near the bookshelf, not behind his desk where he usually retreated. His posture was tense again, but not in the way that signaled panic. This felt different, more like anticipation mixed with uncertainty. "Sir, you asked for me?" Elena said. Marcus took a slow breath. "Yes, I need to show you something." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thin medical file, the same kind she had seen earlier, only from a distance. He placed it on the desk carefully, as though it contained more than paper, like it carried the weight of a life he had tried to bury. "This is the full report from the accident 20 years ago," he said. "I have not opened it in years." Elena remained quiet, letting him choose his pace. "I told myself that avoiding it made it hurt less," he continued. "But every day that passed, I lost more of myself." He opened the file slowly, revealing faded photographs, a brief police report, and a doctor's note written in neat handwriting. His eyes lingered on one photograph, a crumpled car under a streetlight, its windshield shattered and metal bent inward. "This was the night my fiancée died," he said, voice tight. "I never let myself look at these again, but after today, I think I need to." Elena stepped closer, still respecting the boundary he needed. "You are not alone, sir." Marcus's throat worked as he swallowed. "I know." He pointed at one section in the report. "This says I was unconscious when the rescue team arrived. I always believed I caused the accident. I believed I deserved the pain because I failed her." Elena read the short paragraph. "It says there was a mechanical failure, sir. The brakes malfunctioned. It was not your fault." Marcus's eyes widened, as if hearing those words for the very first time. "I knew that, logically. They told me after the investigation. But trauma does not care about logic." "No, it does not," Elena agreed. "But it does care about truth, and the truth is right there." Marcus closed the file gently and stepped back. His breathing slowed, his shoulders easing with each breath, but she could see a new fear rising behind his eyes. Not fear of the past, but fear of letting go of it. "If I accept that it was not my fault," he said, "then I have nothing left to punish myself with." "That is exactly why you should accept it," Elena replied softly. He looked at her with a rawness he could no longer hide. "I do not know how to live without the guilt. It became a part of me." Elena's voice remained calm. "Then you start by learning who you are without it. And you do not have to do that alone." Something in him broke quietly, not in pain, but like a barrier finally giving way after years of holding too much weight. His eyes softened, and the tension in his jaw released. "Elena," he whispered, using her first name for the very first time. "You have no idea how much it terrifies me that you make me feel different." She held his gaze, steady and warm. Feeling different does not have to be frightening, Marcus. His breath caught. He had not heard his name spoken like that in years, not with fear, not with pity, but with gentleness. A long silence followed, filled only by the faint hum of the office's nightlights. Finally, Marcus spoke again, his voice quiet but sure. "I want to keep going. I want to understand why today felt different, and why you are the first person in 20 years who did not bring me pain." Elena nodded. "Then we take the next step together." Marcus closed the file and placed it back into the drawer, not to bury it again, but to acknowledge that it no longer controlled him. "Tomorrow," he said, "I would like to talk about something that happened long before the accident, something I have never told anyone." Elena said softly, "Whenever you are ready, I will listen." He gave a small, almost invisible nod, one that held 20 years of unspoken grief and the first spark of hope he had allowed himself in just as long. For the first time, Marcus Hale did not fear tomorrow. He was starting to believe it might bring healing. The next morning, Elena arrived earlier than usual, unsure of what Marcus meant when he said he wanted to share something from before the accident. Whatever it was, she sensed it carried a weight he had never allowed anyone else to see. She organized the desk, reviewed the morning schedule, and prepared his coffee the way he preferred it. Black, without sugar, served in a porcelain cup he never touched directly. At 8:30, the door to his private elevator opened. Marcus stepped out quietly, his posture composed but his eyes distant, as if the night had been long and restless. Elena stood. "Good morning, sir." He paused, studying her face the way someone looks at something steady after a storm. "Good morning, Miss Rivera." There was a faint softness in his tone, one that did not exist a few days ago. "Please come in," he added. She followed him into the office. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, warming the room with a gentleness that felt almost symbolic. Marcus did not go to his desk. Instead, he sat on the leather sofa near the window. He gestured for her to take the opposite seat. "Elena," he said carefully, "I want to explain something I have never said out loud." Elena folded her hands in her lap, patient and present. "I am listening, sir." He looked down at his gloves, thumb tracing the seam. The accident was not the beginning of everything. It was the breaking point. But the fear, the distance, it began long before. He took a slow breath. "My mother struggled with her mental health," he said. "Some days she was gentle, some days she was not. Touch was unpredictable with her. I could never tell if it meant comfort or if it meant pain." Elena's expression softened. Marcus continued, voice low but steady. "When I grew older, I learned to avoid physical contact. It protected me. Then I met the woman I planned to marry. She was patient, kind, and she taught me how to let someone in." His eyes darkened with remembrance. "Losing her reopened every old wound," he swallowed. "And for 20 years I convinced myself that keeping the world at a distance was safer than feeling anything at all." Elena spoke gently. "You learned to survive by shutting everything out." "Yes," he said, "but yesterday made me realize something." His gaze lifted to hers. "Survival is not the same as living." The words hung in the quiet room. "You said you wanted to understand why I make you feel different," Elena said softly. "Maybe it is because you are ready to live again, even if it scares you." Marcus looked at her, truly looked. "It scares me more than anything. But when you speak to me, I do not feel the panic I expect. When you stand near me, I do not feel trapped." His voice lowered, vulnerable and raw. "I feel safe." Elena held his gaze without flinching. "Safety is not weakness, Marcus." He exhaled slowly, a release he had denied himself for years. "There is something else," he said. "Last night, for the first time in years, I slept without medication." Elena's breath caught. "That is a significant change." Marcus nodded. "Because when I closed my eyes, the memory that came to me was not the accident. It was your voice. It steadied me." The admission lingered between them, warm and fragile. Elena spoke with quiet certainty. "This is not the end of the journey, sir, but it is a beginning." Marcus leaned back into the sofa, eyes on her, as if seeing a path he never believed existed. "That is what frightens me," he said. "The beginning." "It frightens everyone," Elena replied. "But beginnings also mean hope." A long silence settled, soft, not heavy. Marcus finally nodded, almost to himself. "Then I suppose it is time I learn how to take the next step." And for the first time, he did not speak of fear. He spoke of moving forward. The next weeks unfolded in a quiet, steady rhythm that neither Marcus nor Elena had expected. Every morning, he arrived a little earlier. Every day, he spoke a little more openly. And every evening, he left the office a little less burdened than when he had stepped in that morning. Healing did not crash into his life all at once. It arrived slowly, like sunlight easing through clouds that had hung over him for 20 years. One Friday afternoon, the office was unusually calm. Most executives were out for client meetings, and the executive floor felt peaceful, almost serene. Elena finished reviewing the weekly reports and walked them into Marcus's office. He looked up from his desk with a softness that felt natural now, no longer forced or guarded. "Miss Rivera," he said, "you may come closer." He had never said those words before. With each step she took, his posture remained steady, his eyes clear. When she reached the desk, he did something that would have been impossible only weeks earlier. He removed his gloves. Slowly, deliberately, without shaking. He placed them on the table and rested his bare hands on the polished wood. "I want to try something," he said quietly, "if you are comfortable." Elena's heartbeat quickened, but she kept her tone gentle. "What is it, sir?" He lifted his hand slightly, palm upward, a silent invitation. Elena hesitated only for a moment before placing her hand on his. A warm, grounded contact, neither rushed nor hesitant. No panic stole his breath. No tremor ran through him. His shoulders did not tense. Instead, Marcus inhaled deeply, as if this single touch gave him permission to exist without fear. "This," he whispered, "is the first time in 20 years that I have touched a woman without pain." Elena felt her eyes soften. "You have come a long way, Marcus." He held her gaze. This time, he did not look away. "I would not have made it here without you," he said. "You helped me find the part of myself I thought I lost forever." The sincerity in his voice filled the room like a warm glow. For a long moment, they simply sat there, hand in hand, letting the truth settle between them. Then Marcus spoke again, his voice low, steady, and free of the walls he once lived behind. "I would like to take you to dinner. Not as my assistant, but as someone who has become very important to me." Elena smiled softly, the kind of smile that held understanding and acceptance. "I would like that." He exhaled in relief, something gentle and almost boyish crossing his features. "I did not know if you would." "I would," she said again, "because you are not the man you were 20 years ago. You are becoming someone new." Marcus closed his fingers around hers, holding her hand with a confidence that would have terrified him before. Now, it felt like a promise. That evening, as they stepped out of the building together for the first time, the city lights glowed against the horizon. Marcus paused, looking at the world with a sense of calm he had not felt in decades. "Elena," he said softly, "thank you for giving me my life back." She looked up at him. "You gave it back to yourself. I only stood beside you." And with that, they walked into the night, no longer defined by fear, no longer shaped by the past, but guided by something far stronger: hope.